At times, tenancy transactions will be entered against the wrong tenant, entered accidentally in the tenancy transactions when it was meant for the bond transactions, or entered incorrectly altogether and will need to be removed from the tenant's screen. In this video, we'll look at how we transfer tenancy transactions to several places. From the home screen, we click the tenancy link in the toolbar, search for our tenant, Sarah Hanson, and double-click on her row to open her tenancy screen. Sometimes we may enter incorrect information in relation to a tenancy transaction. We can remove it from the tenancy ledger, but we can't delete it because we rarely delete anything out of the database itself. Instead, we can transfer it to the buffer account, which is like a recycling bin in Chintaro, so we won't see it on the tenancy, but the transaction could be found later if need be. In this example, we accidentally created this administration charge, and as it was a mistake, we need to remove it. To do this, we double-click on the transaction, and once it's opened, we tick the Transfer this transaction box. This allows us to do a number of things. We can transfer this transaction to a different tenancy, which we can have a look at in a minute. We could transfer to the bond account if it was a bond payment, or we could transfer to the buffer account. The reason we can't delete transactions is because auditors may want to see transactions that have been removed, but we can send them to the buffer account, which means that they no longer register as part of the tenancy transactions. They'll no longer appear on the tenant's ledger, and they won't appear on any statements. So we transfer this payment to the buffer account by clicking Transfer to Buffer Account. Chintaro asks, are we sure we want to transfer this transaction to the buffer account? Say yes, and that transaction is now gone. Your Chintaro system administrator will be able to go to the audit functions and see the transaction, who sent it to the buffer account, and the date it was sent if they need to. Another thing we might want to do is transfer transactions to another tenancy. Let's say that the key replacement charge and the key replacement payment that we have entered against John Lennon were actually meant for another tenant, Joseph Bloggs. We open up each transaction by double-clicking on it, ticking the Transfer this transaction box, selecting the correct tenant the transaction was for on the right-hand side, and click the Transfer to Selected Tenancy button. A pop-up appears to let us know that the transaction was transferred successfully, and now we will do the same for the other transaction. Both transactions are now gone from John Lennon's tenancy, and if we go to the tenancy search screen and have a look for Joseph Bloggs' tenancy, we see the key replacement charge and payment have been moved into this tenancy. And if we double-click either transaction, we see the comments here explain where we transferred it from. The last thing we'll have a look at is transferring payments to the bond account. We'll go into George Harrison's tenancy, and here we can see a bond payment in the tenancy ledger. This needs to be moved to the bond account because we need to keep bond transactions and tenancy transactions separate. So again, we double-click on the transaction we want to transfer, click the Transfer this transaction box, and this time we'll click Transfer to Bond Account. Now that we've transferred this transaction, if we click on Bond Transactions, we can see the payment is sitting in the bond ledger, where it should be.